Perfect. Obviously, this room is full of people that I know better than all the other ones. And I reduced the number of tips that I'm going to talk about to 6 because kind of thought that there's a great opportunity for us to then use some of this time to actually share our thoughts on these and then maybe see how that kind of reflects back to what we do. So welcome everybody. Today's topic is going to be creating psychological safe spaces on the pool deck and top tips from sports science, and this is aimed for officials. I chose that picture on a purpose. This is actually from the African Championships this past May in Angola. As you can see, the line of officials they had, these are all officials that were on each end of the pool deck, which I thought was absolutely hilariously a lot. So this is all the timers and all the stroke and turn judges that were always present in every session on both ends. And then they had their 50-meter marks. You can see over there in the corner, there was 2 of them always on both sides at both ends. And then it was the amount of officials of starters and referees was just unbelievable a lot. So I just thought I'd bring this up because I think I've never seen this many officials at once, especially if we are those people who are fighting to get the 4 minimum to the deck at times. So to me, this was a kind of nice surprise. Granted, it was a bigger meet, but it was still 95 degrees hot heat and this many officials on deck. And then on a side of a funny note, they ended this whole meet before the final men's relay by everybody having a dance off, and that included the officials. So maybe we need to start doing that at state too. Just kidding. Anyway, welcome everybody. My name is Mona Arvinen-Barrow. Most of you already know me, but there may be people who don't. I was going to start by just giving a little bit of background of myself, and I start with my sport and my psychology background. I used to be a competitive figure skater in my native Finland. I also played competitive flag football in Finland. And when I came to the United States as a high school student in exchange year, I was in a varsity track and field team, and I went to conference with triple jump and long jump. After that, I went back to my native Finland and I became a professional figure and synchronized skating coach. And then during that time, I took a couple of trips to Europe with my kids and realized that I really want to sell my apartment. I'm going to quit my full-time job as a coach, and I wanted to go and study. And so then I moved to the UK. And then after doing all my degrees and stuff, I became a sport and performance psychology professor. I've done that both in the US and in Great Britain, and some visiting academic scholar stints both in Finland and Germany. In addition to that, I also do the applied work as a sport and performance psychology consultant with credentials in 3 of the main countries that I'm kind of affiliated with. My swimming background is not as great, I think, in terms of like diversity of things that I've done. My fastest 1,000 meters, what I call on Dave Cole's old lady with the blue hair breaststroke, took 29 minutes. And this is when I did that when I was competitive figure skater. So clearly knows that I have no idea how to swim properly. I am a swim parent to Ami, who used to swim for Shorewood Swim Club and Shorewood High School, now swims for Brown University and the Gambia national team. And as all of you know in this call, that I'm also a USA Swimming Certified Official, have been doing that for about 11 years with Shorewood Swim Club. And then I provide sports psychology consultancy for swimmers and other sports as well. In addition to that, which is part of the foundation for why we're doing this, I have been serving Wisconsin Swimming as the Safe Sport Chair for the last year or so. This is what we're doing today is kind of prompted by conversations and presentations that I saw when we all went to Colorado, to Denver, to the USA Swimming retreat last year, not this year. And there was a safe sport dedicated day to start with. And a lot of those things talked about how do we create not just being proactive in our approaches to making sure this sport is safe for everybody, but really trying to think about what does it require for it to be safe from a psychosocial perspective. Typically, I think safe sport has been more sort of retroactive and really focused on how do we report and how do we then eliminate things. But I think the move towards how do we then act in advance that we become more preventative. So what we're talking about today is really in keeping with both the Wisconsin swimming values, which is the fun, achievement, safe, and inclusive teamwork for all those involved, and really sort of in keeping with where I think the safe sport is kind of moving towards as well, is to try to see other things, focus on other things than just bullying and like actual abuse. So this is the last of the 4 series that we've done. First, I talked to the parents, then I talked to the athletes, then to the coaches, and now finally to the officials. All right, so today's goals and disclaimers. The goal to me is what I would say is combine the art and the science of officiating, so we can start creating an environment that fosters peak performance. The disclaimers that I have for today, these are rooted in sports psychological science, so a lot of more focus on psychology rather than other sports sciences. And it's influenced by professional and personal experiences as an official and sports psychology consultant, and with all of the other hats that I may have had as a coach, as an athlete, and all those, and the parent. These all will be supplemented by infographics, which I will upload to the Wisconsin Swimming website following the webinar, as long as I'll also put the webinar there too. And then you get the full list of the citations and sources that I used here. I've actually kept them pretty brief for this one, just because I think a lot of the other ones in the other infographics are also relevant and really useful information. All right, so here we go. My first top tip is that competitive swimming occurs in a set of complex, interconnected sort of set of systems that we have. And if we look at it really from the perspective of what I have there on the left, is that the athlete is central to this whole process. Their thoughts and emotions and feelings and their behaviors and everything's are all in there in the middle. Surrounding the athletes are parents and coaches and teammates, and we as officials also fit in there. And I also included sports medicine team members, because that includes things like strength and conditioning coaches, athletic trainers, physical therapists, all of those people who work with athletes on a regular or irregular basis, depending on their age and their level of competition. We as officials, while we are the ones who are very close to the athletes, particularly in the meet days, we're not the ones who can really control the next layer much, except for when it comes to the swim meets. We're the ones who create the environment during the swim meets. We're the ones who are in charge of that environment. And ultimately, whoever is acting as a meet referee also has the power to stop that. So if things aren't going great, it is up to us to make that call and decide whether the delays that we're experiencing are too long or we need to call off the meet or something. But in general way, we are, as officials, really important part of creating the environment what the swim meets are all about. And we are, by far, I would say, the most governed people in this field as well. So looking at the next tier, we are the ones who are present in all of these different leagues and different levels, and we follow the formal rules and regulations and the ethics and the culture and norms and values that come with this sport. So it's kind of like we're the gatekeepers of lots of different things. And we also happen to act in this bigger team of things like global and national events, including COVID. So all of us probably remember when COVID hit and we had restrictions on how do we run meets. We all of a sudden find ourselves with electric whistles, because blowing into a whistle during a meet was not appropriate because we had masks on. So I think it's important that we recognize that where we sit as officials sits in all of these different layers, and depending on what our position as an official is, we may or may not have an influence in different levels in different ways. If we look at what USA Swimming says about our roles as officials, there are 2 main roles, really simplified. One is to ensure all of the formal rules and regulations are followed at a swim meet. And in doing so, it's our job to create an environment that fosters positive, safe, and healthy environment for peak performance. In that, I want to bring you another image that I have over there, and this is one that we call the athletic triangle, very commonly used in sports psychology, particularly in our labs, and I'm a full advocate for this, that what it actually states is that an athletic performance is kind of like a seesaw. At one end of the seesaw is an injury, and the other end is a peak performance. The older an athlete gets, particularly in swimming, those peak performances are going to be less and less. So they may train really hard for 6 months to be great for those 4 days at the state meet or zone meets or whatever. So they're only expecting those peak performances to happen following a taper. So since we as officials govern the environment where those peak performances happen or are hoping to happen, our role in facilitating an environment that fosters the possibility of a peak performance comes even bigger. At any given time in this athletic season, an athlete is somewhere in between the injury and the peak performance, hopefully spending more time on the right side of the triangle, so on a closer towards the peak performance than on the other side. If it looks like most of their practices and stuff are sort of creeping onto the left, then there needs to be something changes happening, because the closer we get to the injury end, the less chance there is that they're going to be training effectively. The seesaw, like any seesaw, is supported by a big triangle in the middle. On one end of it is the technical and tactical sides of sports. So this is more the things that happens in the pool, the techniques and the different kind of drills and intervals and things like that they train with. And then on the other side is the physical and biological, and that includes things like sleep, body size, muscle mass, all those kind of things. Nutrition plays a big role there, age, and so forth. But at the root of it is those psychological and social aspects, like the mood and behaviors and all those kind of things. If these three things are not in balance, it's likely to tilt you on one side or the other. And if they're not balanced in a good way, it's usually tilts so that the injury side becomes more prominent. The reason why I bring this up to you, even though I don't think officials really need to know this too much, is that we just need to recognize that they spend 6 months of the year or the most of the season creating their triangle so that it's balanced in a way that when they do come behind the blocks at a meet that is important to them, that may or may not be the end of season meet, they are hoping to be at the peak performance end. And because when you get older, those are less and less, it's really important that we recognize our role in cultivating an environment that creates those peak performances. All right, so if we look at this from an official perspective, one of the big things to me stands out is that if you are a great official, or if we're great officials, our job is to create an environment where the attention is more on the athlete rather than on the official. And I think sometimes that's difficult because we are the ones who command that situation. We're supposed to command the situation, that the meet runs smoothly with us. So I'm thinking about all of this, and I'm thinking what would be really important for officials to look at. And I think it's important that as an official, we reflect on things like, how do I as an official contribute to those various systemic levels? How am I influencing the one below me or the one next to me? What connections am I able to directly influence, how and why? So for example, what's my relationship with the coaches on deck? What's my relationship with the timers on deck? What's my relationship with the other athletes in there? What connections can I indirectly influence? So as a starter, how can you influence the different parts of the meet in a way that tries to create a level of the environment in a way that fosters that peak performance? The next top tips, I really like this. Without sport officials, it's just research. Because ultimately it is. If we're not there, it is just research. It's just people having fun on their own, doing things that are not organized, they're not sort of structured. And the ways in which I'd like to describe, and I often describe the officiating situation, what happens in the meet, it's kind of like a dance. And I say, welcome to the dance. Welcome to the dance, to thinking about like, how do we all navigate this thing together? And to me, and a lot of things that I find in the literature on other sports is that successful interactions between the athletes, the officials, the timers, the runners, and the announcer can really look like a well-rehearsed dance routine. In that routine, everybody knows their parts and understand how these parts fit in with the others. And if that's not really happening, we get the meat that doesn't flow. And that usually shows in things like parents are edgy, the audience is looking kind of all over the place. Nobody's really sort of kind of like in sync. They're all kind of out of sync. And I actually think that when we can create this dance where all of these pieces are acting really sort of in sync and in a rhythm, and then usually it has the direct impact on the athletes and how they prepare for the events. And it actually influences the overall mood of the meet. I'm sure everybody here has had a meet where everything went really nice and really in sync. And then you've had those meets when it was like, I have no idea what happened here today. It was just awful in all ways and one. To me, this is basically based on my experience. I think there are very few pivotal factors that help us make this this dance really successful. And I think the first one is to really know that everybody knows their roles and the roles of others and other officials and volunteers on deck. And to me, that often starts by that if I'm, for example, the starter, and I go and give my starters meeting and I go through all the points of what they can and cannot do, I also have created it what I call it's my elevator pitch. My job is to tell the starters also that what do I do and why do I need them to act in certain ways. And if I can get them to understand their help in helping me as a, oh, now we got some echo here. Let me see. Oh, I'm going to mute everybody in there. That's perfect. So if I can get all the timers to understand why I as a starter need them to work or move in certain ways, then and how that helps me as a starter to help the start for the athletes, I usually get them on board a lot better. So making sure that those people who are there, so for example, an announcer knows that why we don't want them to intervene and start saying something right before the referee is about to blow their long whistle. It's really important to tell them why, and then all of a sudden the referee gets a peace of mind and they can do their job properly. I often also say that the first 5 whistles set the rhythm between the athletes, the deck referee, the starter, and the timers, and the announcer. If you screw up your first 5 starts, you know you're going to have a hard time getting them back on your side, because then somebody else is in control of that, and it could be the last timer who decides to do something crazy. But if you're the one who's sort of like, hey, this is how I'm going to demand I'm the orchestrator here, and then you're more likely to get everybody kind of in sync. And I also think the big part of this dance when it operates well is really having a balanced deck referee and a starter so they can tune into each other's strengths and weaknesses. So for example, we have a starter who is used to doing really quick starts, then maybe the referee has to take a little bit more time before they lift their hand up. If you have a referee who's used to taking their time and the athletes are getting antsy, then the starter could do a little bit quicker. So I think it's really important that or if the referee is really quick and the starter feels like the kids didn't have enough time, then the starter can slow that dance down. So I think it's really important that we, as a deck referee starter, we start tuning into each other's strengths and weaknesses to create a balance that creates a rhythm that actually functions throughout the meet. And by the rhythm, I don't mean that you have the X amount of time before you blow the whistle and then you do take your marks, but it can change as long as it feels like it's kind of consistent with each other. And I also think that really big part of this is that how we can get this dance working is that recognizing how do I as a person respond and cope to situations that don't go as planned. So what's my response to stress? Do I get antsy? Do I start swearing? Do I start all of those things? And how do I cope when there is a stressful situation? Because ultimately it's us as officials who will then create that atmosphere and be part of that dance. What I wanted to put here was these different position descriptions. I know these are like the national level, sort of the professional stroke and turn and stuff like that. And I think some of them are a little maybe very detailed that doesn't necessarily need to be in every dual meet that we have. But I think it gives us some idea of what these different positions should be doing on the deck. So then we're more likely to be able to help them. And I added things like announcer and DQ slip runners and, stroke briefer, because those people are also really important part of this dance. So if we can create a dance that actually works and functions smoothly, we really make sure that our DQ slip runners or timer sheet runners do exactly that we as the officials kind of need them to do. In that mind, if we're thinking about it, if a meet that feels in sync creates and fosters positive, safe, and healthy environment for peak performance, that if we put that as our foundational thought, then we can start thinking about how well do I, as an official, understand the roles and responsibilities of others in deck? Do I really know what all of them are supposed to do? What does my part of the dance look like, and how does it connect with the others? So the connections between me as a starter and the timers, and then, which one of the timer, the one who presses the buttons or the one that actually writes them down? What's my routine as an official, and what are my strengths? Because I think sometimes we create our little routines ourselves. How do we do this? Going back to the starter position, for example, like how do I make sure that when do I pick up my clipboard and when do I take an order of finish? Or if I'm a stroke and turn, what do I do when I scan the lanes? Then what if there's a call? I raise a hand, what goes on next? So not only is it important that we understand what others do on deck, but what's my routine? Like, how do I routine this so that it becomes a dance within myself? The more we are in tune with how we operate in those situations, the more likely we're creating a calm, nice, smooth environment that shows that the meet is in sync, which then creates that environment for peak performance. All right. I know this probably should have been the first one, but I thought, no, I'm going to put those foundation first. And my top tip 3 is actually the psychology of officiating. And believe me or not, when I looked back, my field, one of the biggest name in our field, Robert Weinberg, has actually published work on officiating. There's a book on how to be a sport official from the 1990s. First research that I find on this dates back to the 1980s. And so really the psychology of officiating is a long-standing area of study that has taken place over the last almost 50 years. And in that research, there are certain characteristics of an effective officials that has been found through the literature. And what I did here is I put the characteristics, and then I thought I'll give you some definitions just so that we're clear on what everything means. The research has found that good officials are consistent. They have a good rapport. They can be decisive. They have a poise to themselves, and they work with integrity, judgment, confidence, enjoyment, and motivation. And what I want to ask you right now, what do you think is common with all of these characteristics? What's the common denominator, common things with all of them? Well, if we really look at them, most of them are psychological factors. Indeed, all of them are psychological factors. Some of them are thoughts, some of them are behaviors, and some of them are more related to our ability to control or have emotions, right? But for the most part, they are psychological factors that are, for the most part, also observable behaviors. And that's a really important thing to do because let's face it, when we're on deck, we are surrounded by not only the athletes and the coaches, but all the audience. So a lot of these things that we as an effective officials are supposed to show are behaviors that can be observed to an extent by those around us. So if we really look at this, and if we recognize the fact that the quality of officiating in the literature has determined mainly to be psychological, which ultimately then create an environment that fosters that positive, safe, and healthy environment for peak performance, why does officials training spend so little time and training placed on developing and practicing these skills? I don't think we practice those skills. We focus on the rules and regulations and what kind of clothing we should wear. Is our skirt long enough or not? Or do we wear a white shirt right next to the water And I still believe that some man decided that was a good idea for female officials. But we spend way more time on those than we actually do on cultivating or developing and practicing these particular skills and factors that are found to be really crucial good officials. So I think for us as officials, really good thing is to kind of reflect on and thinking about, well, which of these factors do I possess? And which of these actually come really naturally to me? Because I'm sure a lot of them do, and a lot of them are transferable skills from our jobs and things like that. But what are those things that I need to work on so that on the observable front, that when I'm with these athletes and in front of all the parents and stuff, how do I make sure that I am developing and showing all of these different characteristics that make me a great official? So if you're thinking about this, I think one of the things on a hot summer day, motivation is one of the worst ones. Like, going through an 8-hour meet, it's grueling, it's awful, let's be honest, especially when there's no air conditioning or any kind of fan that functions us. So then I would say my poise, how do I carry myself in there, can easily go down. That doesn't mean that I don't want to be there or I don't want to do things properly, but just because of the environment that I'm in can really test your motivation, that how am I willing to put on that action. So I think it's really important for us to kind of say, like, if these are the characteristics we should have, which ones do I already know really well? Which one I can transfer from my existing work? And really, what are the things that I can really work on a little bit more? All right, so let's move on. So if we believe that those 8 factors are true, then I'm going to throw in another thing and say you as an official are just as much of a performer as the athlete is in the pool. Just like any performer, whether it's an athlete or a musician or a dancer or a surgeon or a firefighter or a soldier or a police officer, sport officials are actually in there the same way, expected to perform their duties consistently to a high standard. And no official is born with prerequisite skills and strategies. It's not something that happens innate. We all need to practice those. And all of those needs to be, we practice our craft. We need to have that. Good officials have found the ability to focus, being able to concentrate and relax under pressure and relate to other better. All of those require systematic practice, but all of those skills are important for us to be able to do our job properly. And if we see officials as a performer, then I'd say the same performer rules apply. So we as humans, we're actually really simple, and this is the psychology lesson here today, that we have thoughts and emotions and behaviors which affect the outcome. And our emotions are always tied up with physiological reactions. So let's just think about if we're excited or if we are stressed, we get a similar physiological response. Our hands may get clammy, like sticky. We might get butterflies in our stomach. Our heart rate increases. Our breathing gets heavier. We may get flustered. We may get red cheeks and all that kind of stuff. All of those things are normal responses that are tied to certain emotions that we experience. But if we really look at how the human functions, is that in any situation that we're in, we have thoughts about the situation that will then trigger emotions about the situation, and that triggers the physiological reactions. And those emotions are translated into behaviors, which then triggers another set of thoughts and vice versa. As you can see, the circle in the middle is bidirectional. Sometimes thoughts trigger behaviors directly and then emotions and so forth. And this cycle, the cognitive affective behavior cycle, is also influenced by lots of other personality factors and external and situational factors. So for example, I might be perfectly calm and really happy on the deck, and then a coach comes and yells at me as an external situational factor, which triggers thoughts and then creates an emotional response and behavior response that may or may not be very good. Equally, my personality factors, the fact that I'm not faced by those kind of things, may think that, well, actually I can calm those nerves down quicker, and therefore it doesn't really affect the ways in which I operate. But in any case, this cycle has a direct impact on the outcome of how we behave. So that could mean that if we've had those flustering moments on deck, then all of a sudden you realize that, hey, I did not focus on that heat at all. And all of those kids just swam and I have no idea what they did. Just like any performer, all of this requires practice, and we can control these things. We can control our thoughts and we can control our emotional and behavioral responses. But if we're not recognizing what those are, it's really difficult to rectify them. All right. So here my food for thought comes from Michael Phelps. I really like this. I can only control my performance. If I do my best, then I can feel good at the end of the day. And I think that is one of those things that really resonates with when it comes to officiating. Remember, we're all here mainly because that was something that we did as a volunteer to begin with. And we are all human and we're not getting paid for this. So even though there's expectations that we're great, we can only control how we do our things. And if we try our best and try to be the best version of ourselves by creating that environment that fosters the possibility for peak performance, then we should be happy about what we did. We're not supposed to be perfect. We can do our best and be mindful of how I behave in those environments. So thinking about the critical questions again. So if the goal is to create an environment that fosters the positive, safe, and healthy environment for peak performance, I think there are things that we can ask ourselves. Are there any specific thoughts and emotions and behaviors or physiological factors that have a negative effect on my performance as an official? Like anything that I take there and actually does not make me do my job well? Are there anything that actually gives a positive effect on those my performance as an official? Maybe it's that getting somebody to tell me good job or using breathing or something like that. Are there any specific situational external factors that influence the ways in which I think, feel, and behave at a meet? I think the biggest one is to think about, well, how do I change when I know that my own kid is about to come and swim? You know, am I starting to get nervous and look around and said, are they going to come behind the blocks on time? Or what's the relationship if they didn't swim that well, if they want to come and talk to me? So for example, we've always had a rule with Ami that we don't interact during them on deck because that's my space and that's her space. And I respected that really well, never went to talk to her. And then she comes to me and says, Mom, I want to buy the t-shirt or a sweatshirt with the, you know, from the front. I say, hang on a minute, you're breaking the rules. I'm stroke and turning right now. You don't come and ask me for a t-shirt because you're now interfering my performance and my role. So get out of here. You're not getting a shirt. We can talk about this afterwards. But those kind of things that can be really important that we recognize that, hey, if I know that I get super nervous about my kids swimming and I really want to watch them, is it fair on the other swimmers by me shifting my focus? Or is it better that I remove myself from the situation and have somebody else take care of my role for that time so then I can watch my kid and I'm not losing my focus on the other ones? The other thing is also to think about, are there any specific personal factors that influence the ways in which I think, feel, and behave? And that could be that you may have outcome expectations. That may be that you desperately want them to get that cut. Are there anything that you are living at the moment that are kind of interfering with your ability to provide that great environment? All right. So this one, I love it. I don't know if anybody's not seen Inside Out 2 yet. Absolutely worth the watch. I walked in there and I said, this is sports psychology 101 in a simplest way, put into action, and really, really, really suitable for anybody who's going through their teenage years. It validates the mom and the dad and it validates all the crazy that goes on with the kids at that point, but it also allows you to start talking about things that are really important. And what really stand out there for me is that when the anxiety arises, it takes the joy away. And that is so true when you look at the literature on sports psychology. It's that when performance anxiety arrives, it takes the fun and the enjoyment away. Not only from those kids, but it also takes the fun and joy away from us. So if I'm an official and I'm in a meet and I feel like I'm completely out of my depth and everybody else is way better than it's very intense and nothing's really going my way, it absolutely can take the joy away from the officiating. And interestingly, if we really look at what the research has said, they have identified a number of reasons for stress for officials. Usually it's lack of experience, lack of confidence, when our own child is in about to swim or do any other things, or when officiating a really high level meet with a lot at stake. And if we
Hey,
look at,
Mona,
yes,
do you want me to share?
yes, but not yet. But yes,
Okay,
I
you
want you
let
to
me know
share.
when you do, because I
Yes, I'll tell you. Yes, I was hoping that you would, but I wasn't going to put you in the spot to do that. But if we look at this data that exists, is baseball, basketball, and football officials, the biggest cause of stress was making a bad call. And what do all of our stroke and turn judges usually say? Raising the hand is the hardest part because they think they're making a bad call. All right, Katie, go. You want to share?
all right. Yep, I will. So I started my stroke and turn official journey in 2019, and I got over those nerves. And then our club asked me to continue on my journey, and I was terrified. It's funny listening to you, Mona, talk about it a little bit. So I was like, all right, I got to start this race. And what if they fall in? What if I do something wrong? And I was super fortunate that, I don't know, is my second apprentice was with you, Mona, I think, on
Yep.
starter. And she knew it. She could see it. And it had nothing to do with my kid. It had nothing to do with my club. It was just me going, man, I got to give these kids a fair start. And what if I screw up? And I was, again, super fortunate with Mona, and she just helped me to uh, breathe first, right? Um, I'm a volunteer, and I think the biggest thing for me, so I did that, gosh, Mona, was that 2 years ago that we had that, I think, the first
Mhm.
one with you?
I think so, yeah.
And then now to look at, I'm got my ref certification, but one of my proudest moments was a couple weeks ago at the Shorewood meet, and I was starting, and Mona going, that was an amazing start. That was an amazing start. You did really good. And for me, it was just the fear of like, I'm here for the kids. For me, that's like my whole purpose being doing what I do was I'm here for the kids and I want to make sure they have a really good start. And I'm super appreciative for you, Mona, because you knew that I was just terrified, absolutely terrified.
So let me unpack a little bit. The reason why I knew you were terrified is because I gave you this, you had the starting apparatus in your hand and your hands were shaking. Your shoulders were up in the close to your ears and you were breathing heavily as anything. And as we're trying to say, okay, just test the buttons, and all I could see was fingers that are shaking, and there was no sort of what I would say strong command of those. That was real. And honestly, I don't think you would have, if I would have just said go for it, I don't think you would have done it. So do you want to share what we did?
Yeah, so she gave me a dead mic and starter and just said, stand behind. I can't remember who it was. Stand behind and you pretend, right? Like you pretend and you do it and you pretend and you do it. And I still, it's been a bit since I've had a fall, where I hit the button before I say take your marks, but um, I just had to practice. And I've been at so many swim meets, right? But it was just practicing and gaining my confidence of, okay, you can do this. It was huge for me.
Yeah, so that's another strategy that I used in that moment. I actually told Katie, I said, why don't you just first go behind everybody in the corner in the Sherwood pool? Nobody sees you. You're just starting them on your own with this dead mic that has the cord hanging nowhere. And when you feel ready, go behind the starter. So then you pretend that you're actually starting with the starter, but it's still not you. And I said, and when you feel ready, then tell us, and then we'll put you behind the real mic. So there was no expectations of her doing it. I said, if you do one of them during this session, I'm okay with that. That's great. That's better than zero. But we started off by desensitizing Katie into out of her own fear by using different strategies and different steps so that eventually she was able to do it. And like I said, we've got a fantastic starter in our mix right there. All right, so then if we look at this a little bit further, let me just change the thing in here. I think one of the things that is really important for us to recognize that anxiety and stress and excitement are actually physiologically almost the same. So how we respond to anxiety and stress or excitement is almost identical because they both increase the heart rate, they create feelings of butterflies in your stomach, they increase your bodily tension. So physiologically, your body is readying itself for action. Like the action is either super exciting or like, it doesn't matter, it's an action. Psychologically, these are different though, because excitement is connected to emotional joy and having fun, and anxiety is connected to fear. So I think it's really important that we recognize that actually what our body is feeling is normal. It's how we psychologically make sense of that that makes the difference. So I think it's important that if we subscribe to the idea that we as officials, we're also performers, and performers can get anxiety and stress because of the situations that we're in, and we may get nervous. Like, well, how does it affect me? Like, how does anxiety and stress affect me? What are my typical responses to it? And how do I typically cope with these stressful situations? Are my coping strategies healthy or are they harmful? I always say that one of my main ways to cope with stressful situations is move. If you see me doing figure skating moves and steps on bare feet, that means I'm stressed. That means I'm nervous. And that's how I'm releasing my tension. Not the most appropriate if I'm behind the mic about to start a race. So that's not something that I can do. But it's like, what is your typical way to cope with stressful situation? Is it to walk away? Take exhales and inhales and calm yourself down? Or is it something that you can just like switch off and not think about it? We all have very different coping strategies, same way as all the athletes have. So the more we're able to understand ourselves, the more we're able to then navigate the officiating setting in a way that, again, promotes an environment that promotes peak performance. And equally, I like to think about this as what gives me joy then? You know, we're not doing officiating because it's a chore. We should be doing it because it's fun. Like, what is it that gives me fun? What of this makes it fun for me? What of this makes me excited and walk away is like, yeah, that was exhausting. It was 4 hours. I'm sweaty, but man, I really had fun doing it because we all should be enjoying what we do for those kids. Okay, so this leads me to the whole idea of what is my why? Like, why are we doing this? I guarantee you, I started this because my first volunteering was that I was trying to organize the 8 and unders, and that to me is like herding ants and telling them to sit still. Not gonna happen. My second was to be behind the concessions. I'm not good at selling donuts and counting monies in English, so I was like, this is not a job for me either. So then I got all asked about, would I become an official? And I was like, I know nothing about swimming. Again, my 1,000 meters was 29 minutes. So my skills aren't that great. My technique is horrible. But then I realized that there are 2 big reasons for why I do this. I want to be able to contribute to the sport. And by doing so, I'm also understanding the sport better. And also, I'm a sports psychology professional, and I don't like to sit in the bleachers when it's hot and hear parents who are doing constant comparison about their kids, which goes against all of the things that I study and learn about. And I thought that I have a too big of a mouth, so it's better that I don't sit there, and it's better that I'm on deck. But we all have a reason why we do this. You know, usually it starts by fulfilling the volunteering requirements for the swim club. And it usually then creates us to be in a situation that we're wearing more than one hat at a time. And sometimes it also, by having those multiple hats, it actually creates a situation where we may be doing, say, sport, minor athlete abuse policy violations, just because unintentionally we did not realize that this was part of our dual roles. Because all of a sudden, the athlete, coach, and the parent triangle that exist is no longer just athlete, coach, parents triangle, but the parent has also become an official and by default has become an applicable adult that has a different role. So to ensure that we fulfill our two main roles as an official, I think it's really useful to ask about what is my why do I officiate, and what do I gain from it? And when I can do that, it helps me navigate those multiple hats as well and create a cleaner lines between various roles you may occupy. So for example, as an official, my job is not to critique my kid swimming. As a parent, also not my job to start critiquing her swimming or giving her advice. I'm not an expert in it. I'm not a coach. It may be my role as a parent to ask, what do you need from me for your next meet? But it really isn't my job to say, well, you could have done this, or this was close to DQ, or this and this. That's not my place. I've noticed that sometimes my place when we travel to these overseas meets with her has become that I need to help her do some warm-up starts. And sometimes I get chastised for those for not doing them properly because apparently I'm supposed to know since I'm an official who starts. But I was just being a mom with the phone and that was okay, but it doesn't always work that way. So I think it's important that we recognize what hats do we have in our heads and how does that then relate to our role as the official who has to abide by minor athlete abuse prevention policies, and how does that then translate over to being a parent? So I think it's important for us to recognize that as an official, we are considered an adult participant. And while a lot of these dual relationship that are outlines, like has exceptions in the MAP 2.0 policy, there is really important for us to review that annual to make sure that you comply by its rules. So for example, what if you do carpool and you have minor athletes in your car and you don't have a letter from them to indicate such that you can have those kids in your car? What if somebody comes for a sleepover? Not that I'm saying all of this is like wrong, but I think when we have those dual hats, we really need to make sure that we look and understand the duality of it, and then recognize when do we need to like step back and what other things that we can and should or should not do. In my case too, I have another role, which is a sports psychology consultant working with some swimmers, and some of them may be minor. So then I put that hat in there too. Like, where does that fit? For example, if I'm in a meet as an official, and there is a kid that I worked with, what's my relationship with them on deck? And in that case, the relationship is non-existent. So I need to make sure that I treat them the same as any other kid in there. So I think it's important that we ask a couple of questions from ourselves, like, why do I officiate? What's my why? Why do I do this? How many dual roles do I occupy? And I'm going to say dual or triple. And how can I navigate my why with these roles to minimize the conflict and ensuring that I'm coherent and really adhere to the MAP compliance rules? All right. Now I have no idea why this one actually says the top tip, this is a mistake. So let's take that limiting, winning and having fun and not mutually exclusive out. What I really wanted to say here, this is my bonus tip, and now I don't understand why this hasn't changed. I think the really big part is what I wanted to bring out to everybody is that we as officials, and I've said this over again today many times, we have two main roles. One is to ensure the formal rules and regulations are followed at a swim meet, and in doing so, we create that environment that fosters positive, safe, and healthy environment for peak performance. So in addition to understanding the rules, an effective official also understands all of those internal and external factors that influence not only themselves, but also the other stakeholders' emotions and thoughts and behaviors on deck. And that includes people like athletes, the parents, coaches, other volunteers, and other officials. And to be effective as an official, I think you should check out some of those things that I did for athletes and parents and coaches about how to create this environment that fosters the opportunities for better peak performance. Because in doing so, you can then understand, hey, these are the things that are really important for athletes to know. How can I, in my role as an official, foster those? Apologies for that. That was not supposed to be there. All right, and now we get to the final word before we can have a little conversation, and that's kiitos, which means thank you in Finnish. And Mike, let's pause this at this point. I don't think we need to